It's the 27th of the 7th, 2025. The time is 22 minutes past 8, and that means only one thing. Post Spa-Francorchamps, the Belgian Grand Prix, round 13, there is news, and there is news. For the avoidance of doubt, all F1 journos are created equal, but some are created more equal than others, especially as it pertains to Maximilian Verstappen news. For the avoidance of doubt, the context is this. Toto has been desperate, will drop kick in the chest either one of, at this point, Kimi Antonelli or King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, to get a whiff of the signature of Maximilian Verstappen. So keen is he to make amends for the mistakes that he made in 2015 when he had in his hands the next generation of driver. He has a name, and his name was Maximilian Verstappen. Sadly for Toto, though, there was no room then at the Mercedes Inn. Their seats were filled. It was Nico and it was Lewis, and then Nico retired, and then ever since that, Toto's regretted his decision. Now, however, there's been circumstance, there's been rumour, there's been speculation, there's been stipulation, there's been performance clauses. Julian Cerasoli said that if Max is lower than the top two as at July the 31st, then he can trigger his performance contract, nulling and voiding his contract with Red Bull with immediate effect. Other people of late over the past 48 hours mentioned those names: ESPN, F1, Nate Saunders, again, God Theory in the know F1 people said that it wasn't second, it was third. Ergo, if Max Verstappen was lower than third, fourth or lower in the championship as at the Hungarian Grand Prix, then he could get out. He will not be, though, especially on the back of today's race result. Eric Van Haren, though, has come out and he's tweeted and written an article. It gets techier than techie things. Here's what he said, chat. Eric Van Haren is the go-to guy for the avoidance of that. When we're talking about Maximilian Verstappen bits and bobs, he's that guy in the know, closer to the Max Verstappen camp than any other journo. Writes for the Telegraph. He can take this one to the bank. Do you know what I mean? This is as ironclad as it's going to get as far as Maximilian Verstappen's future. Now, there has been no official announcement, but I think this is as official as we will get. Lest we forget, Nelson Valkenberg of Viaplay said he suspected that there was going to be an announcement, a press event over the course of the Belgian Grand Prix race weekend. Ralf Schumacher said that Toto and Max were going to be negotiating, talking on their boats, respectively, and apparently that happened in Sardinia. They've been discussing ad infinitum. Happened in the Miami Grand Prix race weekend last year, and so too over the course of the summer break. Now here's your latest update, and here's where it gets techier than techie things. Eric Van Haren, legend of the Telegraph, he writes this. For those still in doubt, Max Verstappen will also drive for Red Bull Racing, Oracle Red Bull Racing in 2026. Max Verstappen can no longer use the exit clauses in his contract as he's guaranteed P3 by the summer break anyway, but that's merely a formality. He had already decided that he wants to stay on the back of the dismissal, in brackets unsaid, read between the lines, on the back of the dismissal of Christian Horner. It is salacious, it is misconduct. It is Christian Horner Racing as opposed to Oracle Red Bull Racing. Now, in that article, it gets techie than techie things. Let's read this. Let's go through it together, because I wanted to go through the details with you guys before I got into it myself. Here's what Eric Van Haren says. And again, I think you can take this to the bank. As much as people say it's rumour and speculation, when Eric Van Haren of the Telegraph writes it, you can take, and it's Max Verstappen pertaining to, I think you can take it to the bank. Here's what he said. All speculation can now be thrown in the trash, says Eric Van Haren. Max Verstappen will also drive for Red Bull Racing in 2026. For those who still had doubts, Verstappen will definitely drive for Red Bull Racing in 26. That's a logical conclusion after the Belgian Grand Prix. The performance clause in his contract is no longer in effect this season, now that the four-time world champion, soon to be five-time champion, will definitely be in the top three during the summer break. Techie. So this is Hungary, just as was alluded to by Nate Saunders of ESPN. Sometimes when you talk about these things and you want to get definitive, if you are to put on your journalistic cap and you hold integrity front and centre of mind, you need two sources. Eric Van Haren and Nate Saunders of ESPN F1 are saying the same thing here. But I digress. Eric Van Haren continues. Mercedes team boss Toto, the boy who cried wolf, who was as interested, who was and is very interested in Verstappen's services, is now also completely certain that he must move on towards next year. Oh, and by the way, if you want further surety around this, you heard Toto saying there will be no surprises. Our priority going into the Belgium Grand Prix, when he said this, our priority will be signing Kimi Antonelli and keeping one King George Russell. You can expect an announcement around their contracts within the next couple of weeks. The rumour, word on the F1 curb around George, is that they offered him a 1+1. Why? Why, ladies and gentlemen? Ask yourself that question. Why George didn't want to sign a 1+1, just as Sir Lewis didn't want to before, because a 1+1, a 1-year contract with an option to extend, means that at the end of next year, he will be vulnerable yet again. Why? Because Toto's desire to sign Max Verstappen will not go away in 2027. 2026 end of, Max Verstappen will survey the environment and see which one of these teams has the whip hand, and then he will make his choice. Mercedes, continues Eric Van Haren of The Telegraph, is therefore expected to announce a new deal shortly with current drivers Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, who finished 5th in Belgium and is now 28 points behind Max Verstappen, 4th as at the Spa-Francorchamps Grand Prix. There is only one more race. That will be Hungary, and you can only win a maximum of 25 points then. Therefore, Maximilian Verstappen will be P3 as at the summer break. That is not sufficiently low to trigger his performance clause, null and void that Red Bull contract. Ergo, it sounds like Toto and Ola Kalunias have agreed it makes no sense to fork out 100 million this year with a view to trigger that buyout clause. Why don't we just wait till next year? Prove ourselves a team capable of winning races and therefore championships. Prove that we have, just as we did the power unit, the Apex Predator power unit, just as we did in 2014, split turbo hybrid settings, after which Max Verstappen will just come over and we just need to fork out the 100 million a year, not the 200 million in the first year that we need to do if indeed we needed to activate the buyout clause. Max Verstappen 4th at the Spa-Francorchamps Grand Prix. This means that the Dutchman will definitely go into the summer break in 3rd place with 1 race remaining before their next weekend at the Hungaroring. Oh, the humanity. Eric Van Haren continues, a door, however, is always open for Max Verstappen. Now we're not just talking about Mercedes, we're talking about Aston Martin. We're talking about any team up and down the grid. Franz Tost told you this. This isn't Max glazing. If it's true, Max is worth anywhere between 2 and 3/10, they say, in equal machinery on the other 19. That's why this is so chaotic. That's why it's always going to be techie than techie things. That's why there is not a team principal on the grid who wouldn't sell their grandma to get a whiff of the signature of Maximilian Verstappen. Eric Van Haren writes, if next season Red Bull, for the first time with its own engine, proves to be lagging far behind, I was going to say lagging indicator then, financial services trading settings, Verstappen can always make a more considered decision to drive elsewhere in 27. By then, you'll have a better understanding of the dynamics in the new Premier Class era, new rules and regs. For a driver of Verstappen's calibre, a door will always be open elsewhere. He will have his pick of the litter. You can take that one to the bank again. This isn't algebra, nor are we trying to solve for Fermat's last theorem here. This is just common sense counting. Eric Van Haren continues, and the next connection with Wolf, and the connection with Wolf even, who still hopes to work with the Dutchman again, will undoubtedly remain open. They will be talking as they have been for the past 24 months because Toto now sees that he's got a weakness in his lineup. Andrea Kimi Antonelli has not been performing. He's not ready. As if he were chicken, you would catch salmonella. He's green, unseasoned. Yeah, he might get there one day. But he's 18 years old and he's feeling the pressure, crying at press conferences. Some may say that it's not fair to put Andrea Kimi Antonelli, not ready, unready, in the spotlight as Toto, the boy who cried wolf, has. The Red Bull top brass breathes a sigh of relief. It's the exec levels, the C-suite exec level bods. They've made the decision now to get rid of Christian Horner. If Maximilian Verstappen had gone in 2026, what do they have left? Just Lauren Mechier's and Tsunoda-san. That's not good enough. That's not going to win any races. Not even if Tsunoda-san has all of the upgrades that Red Bull can design at the hands of Enrico Balbo and Pierre Vacher. Eric Van Haren continues. Red Bull top brass breathes a sigh of relief. It was clear that Verstappen had serious doubts for some time about his future at Red Bull, at the altar, of course, of the power unit and the material underperformance season to date, which, after dominant years, has been struggling since the beginning of last season and has been overtaken, particularly by McLaren. With new team principal Mekies at the helm, Verstappen wants to focus on the future. How long into the future, though? Mr. Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time. Are we talking short or medium to long term? Red Bull's management can breathe a sigh of relief for now that the leader is staying on board. The leader, look at that. I know there is translation issues here, but the leader is Max Verstappen, by the way, and not Laurin Mekies. One of them is disposable. The other one is Maximilian Verstappen. The team couldn't afford to lose Verstappen, especially after the decision to retire Christian Horner after more than 20 years. Picture this, chat. Just picture this. Indulge me for a second. Envision this. Rob Marshall leaves an F1 team. So does Adrian Newey. So does Jonathan Wheatley. Christian Horner leaves. And then Maximilian Verstappen leaves. Oh, the humanity. Does that F1 team, does it even exist in its prior form? It's a brand new team. Is it even an F1 team if it loses all those god tier intellectual and driving personnel? I would argue not. Eric Van Haren bookends his stanza, his soliloquy, this way. Verstappen continued to stay at Red Bull for at least another season. So here's what they've done. Remember when Sir Alex Ferguson, for those football fans of you, begged Cristiano to stay one more season, just one more season, and then we'll let you go. That sounds like what's been agreed here. Stay one more season. We're too unstable. Give us a chance. Let's see where the Ford power unit goes. And thereafter, if you still choose to have your pick of the litter and go to a Mercedes or an Aston Martin, then we won't stand in your way, is what the Bulls that Red are saying. Verstappen's continued to stay at Red Bull for at least another year is logical and sensible. Peter D. Wins, a friend of the channel, have been saying this for the longest time, mate. Why would he leave now? It's one of those decisions that you have to make, and it has to be right. Mention no names. Alan Prost in 93. You take a step back, see the F1 wood for the F1 trees, touch some F1 grass, see what happens in 2026. Brand new rules and regs, aerodynamic and power units, by the way. The first time, I think, in F1 history when they've changed the regs of both. Normally it's just one. And that's why potentially you don't want to make the decision, the gamble, to go to a Mercedes or an Aston Martin before you even see where they are in real time. Yeah, Mercedes might have the whip hand. Everybody said they've expedited for their project, their power unit just now. That's the feeling and sentiment in Middle England. But nevertheless, you'll never know for sure, right, until 2026 in testing or even the first race in Australia. You'll never know. Sometimes in F1, there is no smoke without F1 flames, but sometimes you can get sold a dummy. Supposing we rock up an Aston Martin by dint of Adrian Newey's genius, the last airbender, have all of a sudden designed themselves for up, because rest assured, Adrian Newey is locked away designing it in conjunction with Andy Cowell, who's not a bad F1 mind, neither. Verstappen could have been released from his contract, which runs until 2028. If he had finished outside the top three during the summer break, the Limburg native is feeling comfortable at Red Bull and is currently very pleased with his collaboration with new team principal Laurin Mekies. Oh, the humanity. Oh, the humanity. Christian Horner was a stumbling block to getting this over the line, eh? Switching after this year would be a big risk, said Peter D. Wins, a friend of the channel. Leaving without exercising a clause, for example, by waging war internally and having his contract bought out is out of the question. Ergo, Maximilian Verstappen will be a Red Bull racing driver, an Oracle Red Bull racing driver in 2026. And even if Max Verstappen had been able to exercise his release clause, it's highly questionable whether he would have actually embraced it. When asked, manager Raymond Vermeulen said he wouldn't comment on contracts and any clauses, pointing to Verstappen's ongoing commitment to Red Bull racing. Verstappen has always been loyal to Red Bull, Eric Van Haren of The Telegraph continues, and will be taking a big risk if he were to switch to another team after this year. After all, F1 regulations are going to be completely overhauled in 2026. Behind the scenes, the talk about the new Mercedes engine is positive, but that, of course, offers no guarantees. Oh, the humanity, chat. It looks like, again, if we're playing investigative games, It looks like, almost beyond the shadow of a doubt, barring the overweight lady singing, Maximilian Verstappen will be a Red Bull, an Oracle Red Bull racing driver in 2026, then potentially Matthew Brown, too kind as always, sir. Then potentially shortly thereafter, if Mercedes have the whip hand and Maximilian Verstappen is forced to endure the underperformance in perpetuity that he's undergoing currently, because of the RB21 understeer settings, the snap oversteer, poor performance, not so much reliability issues, but as near as makes no difference, everything else as far as handling dynamic. If that still persists in 2026, in conjunction, notwithstanding the collaboration even between Red Bull powertrains and Ford, then you bet your bottom dollar he will leave. Oh, and by the way, the Techie. Take that to the bank. That feels like it's new, full stop, new paragraph as far as this story is concerned. But you know what else I wanted to touch on in the next 10 to 15 minutes or less? I heard a couple of things from Lando Norris and it's getting on my nerves. People keep saying, stop going so hard on Lando. Say how you really feel. And then I thought maybe, let me fact check myself. Let me wind my net back in. And maybe I was going a bit too harsh on Lando Norris. So I just had a look at the interviews afterwards. Did you hear Lando Norris in his interviews? Did you hear what he said? He was asked the question, yeah, you made a couple of mistakes, P1, you lost a second, you lost another second potentially in the pits. There were another couple of errors there were probably about 3 or 4 seconds in total at the altar of mistakes of unforced variety, particularly in the second stint on the hard. Nando says, you know what, I did make a couple of mistakes. I was pushing hard on those hards with a view to catch my teammate Oscar Piastri. 25 points is at stake. But Lando continues, these things happen. Hang on. What? Who do these things happen to, Lando? Open, non-rhetorical question. Who exactly? Did these things happen to Oscar Piastri? I didn't see Oscar Piastri going off at P1. I didn't see any mistakes to the material variety. I didn't see him struggling to keep it on the island, notwithstanding the fact that he's doing faster snap after faster slap. Do you know what I mean? Nearly goes purple in the penultimate lap of the race because he's dialed in. Do you know what I mean? His attention span doesn't waver. Lando Norris goes on to say this, and this is where I thought it got techier than techie things. He goes, yeah, I'm sure Oscar made mistakes. Are you sure, Lando? I did not see them. I did not see them. Not to that extent. Of course, Oscar wouldn't have been perfect, but did he keep it on the island for 100% of the race? Of course he did. He did it. There were no offs from Oscar Piastri, and therein lies the difference. Lando, yeah, Oscar will make himself a mistake at the British Grand Prix. So too Austria Turn 6, but they don't look like Lando Norris's ones. Do you remember Singapore, where Lando Norris was as near as makes no difference perfect? The 1 and 2 times he wasn't. Those were big bloody mistakes, potentially race-ending ones. Your mistakes, Lando, look very different to Oscar's, and therein lies the problem. If we're having the conversation, sir, under the umbrella heading of who's going to win this championship, lest we forget, we go into Hungary, the last race 13, race 14 even, just before the summer break. 16 points is the quantum between OJ Piastri and Lando. It is getting larger. Lando came in here and was meant to have all the momentum. He dropped it on pole, but did he consolidate for the pole? And then you go and check out the bloody mechanics and the nuance as far as the race restart off the start. Chaos, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. Oscar Piastri was playing chess and Lando was playing checkers. It was chaos. Oscar Piastri set him up like a kipper. He done Lando Norris 1.0 like a kipper. It was easy. It was like taking candy from a baby. Go back and check out the replay. Oscar Piastri going into the source makes his car big. Does a cheeky Nigel Mansell dubby and makes himself big in the mirrors of Lando Norris, to which Lando responds. He's looking, not at the apex, but he's looking in his wing mirrors at Oscar Piastri to see whether he needs to cover him off properly. He sees Oscar and decides to cover him off, but in so doing sacrifices the geometric racing line and his entrance into the source. He makes his angle of attack more narrow than it need be, especially if he's looking to straight line the curve, at which point Oscar Piastri does one of these and makes sure he takes the wide line with a view to get on the throttle quicker, earlier than Lando Norris. So he's got the run already going down into Eau Rouge, a wet, rainy, rain-strewn Eau Rouge. Oscar Piastri, Zach Brown said once upon a time, is braver through the quick stuff, the high to medium speed twisties. And if ever you wanted a case in point that was the truth, just look at how Oscar Piastri attacks Lando going through Eau Rouge. Absolute chaos. Barely any visibility. And Lando's a bit like, I don't know about this, going through full tank of fuel, first lap, unsure. Oscar Piastri, so forensic is he in his car placement, so brave is he through the high speed turns, almost zero lift as near as makes no difference. Oscar Piastri's like, I'm going to slipstream you, I'm going to get you into Le Calm. It is chaos, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't realise in real time that Oscar had set Lando up that way. He gets the run, unbelievable. He's earlier on the throttle, out of La Source going into Eau Rouge, and just carries the speed all the way, and it is chaos. Oscar said afterwards that was my intention. Planned it. It was there. I was going to nail him off the restart, and that's exactly what he did. Oscar Piastri is singing from a different hymn sheet to Lando. I don't even care if Lando might go and win the championship. Do you know what I mean? That's not, and there is not a non-zero probability of that happening. But I think Oscar's playing. He's in only his third season, by the way. If we're comparing apples and apples, Lando's in his seventh, is he not? Can you imagine Oscar Piastri when he's in his seventh, with all of that material experience under his belt? He's going to be a monster, chat, a monster potentially that only Maximilian Verstappen can slave for. That was honestly. He's thinking differently. And again, they ignore that. Let's take that as an anomalous instance. Go back and check out Baku last year. That overtake on Charles Leclerc is rarefied air. Only the great ones can pull those sort of manoeuvres. Same thing on Sir Lewis Hamilton, round the outside, two trailer park goals. This year, chaos, ladies and gentlemen. Same thing last year, the Italian Grand Prix chicane too. You don't just do those things if you're any noddy driver. He looks a lot like Max Verstappen. Do you know what I mean? The comparison is true. Okay, so he's not there yet. He doesn't have the accolades, nor the longevity, nor the length and breadth of service. I get it. But he looks, squint your eye, and when you check out those manoeuvres and how clinical they are, how forensic he is in his car positioning, it looks a lot like that. It's techie than techie things. Oh, by the way, I wanted to touch this before we went. What was this delay about? Why was the track... Why did they delay so long? Maximilian Verstappen was not pleased. Have you heard him in the press? He's like, well, listen, there's no point, right? You can either do one thing. Either we use the wet tyres and go out and have a race, or we just sack it off. Like one or the, like, do you know what I mean? Make your decision. The FIA. Are we going to be F1 snowflakery? I understand that there is danger. Carlos Sainz alluded to this. He says, listen, it's better to take too long and then regret it than go quickly and regret it. Because you see around Eau Rouge and Radillon that potentially there's some incidents that could cause serious injury, life-threatening injury. And to a certain extent, I agree with Carlos Sainz. He makes the point, though, that it is a bit... he said, here's what he said. I'm going to read it out verbatim because this is going to become a talking point over the next 5 days between now and the Hungarian Grand Prix. He says, on a normal track, I think we would have started maybe 5 to 10 minutes earlier, said Carlos Sainz, Williams driver Carlos Sainz Jr., man from Madrid. He continues, quote, you guys got to watch the full race, so I don't think it was a bad call to delay. A safe call, but my respect to the race director, Rudy Marquez, because he told us after the accidents in Silverstone that he would play it safer here, and that's what he did. Oh, the humanity. I don't know what I make about that, Carlos Sainz. It's techie. It is very techie. However, Anthony Davidson spoke to the stark contrast that there were some other drivers, mentioned the names Max Emilian Verstappen, who were like, what are we waiting for? Are we F1 drivers? What are we doing? Or are we civilians? Is this not Chariots of Fire? Is this F1 proper, or is this F1 snowflakery? Here's what Max Verstappen had to say. We made a choice with the setup and they only allowed us to drive in almost slick conditions. What are they doing? I mean, it was nearly 2 hours before we got to see a wheel turned right. That surely is unacceptable, particularly if we have the conversation under the umbrella heading of the attention dollar, particularly the 18 to 35-year-old who would have just dialed off and gone and watched bloody TikTok or something else, do you know what I mean? Doom scrolled Facebook or Twitter. They've got options now, these young kids. Why would they stay and watch this nonsense when there's no racing happening? Max Verstappen continues. Of course, we spoke after Silverstone to be a little bit more cautious with the decisions, but this was at the other extreme for me. Max Verstappen continues. It was a choice that we made with the setup of the car, which was then the wrong one, of course, due to the excessive delays, because they didn't allow us to race in the wet. Once we got to the dry tyres, we were far too slow, just too slow on the straight. And then with the general balance problem that I already have with the car, it made everything a bit worse, said Maximilian Verstappen. As a wet weather specialist continues Autosport, Verstappen felt the track was close to being ready at the original start time, and he was critical of the drivers, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, mentioned no names, urging for a delay. Between turn 1 and 5, continues Max Verstappen, there was quite a bit of water, but if you do 2 laps behind the safety car, here's where it gets techie. Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen and saying Max Verstappen things. He continues, but between turn 1 and 5, there was quite a bit of water, but if you do 2 laps behind the safety car, it would have been a lot more clear, and the rest of the track, it was ready to go. So why the bloody delays? FIA, Rui Marquez, excessive delays. Max continues, quote, the more you run, it will be much better. And if you can't see, you can always lift. At one point, you will get it. You will be able to see techie than techie things. Max Verstappen talking down his nose at the rest of the grid, the risk-averse grid. Is this F1 snowflakery, or is this chariots of a proper, purist grade Formula 1? Max continues, then it's better to say, you know what, let's wait until it's completely dry and then we just start on slicks, because this is not really wet weather racing for me. At the end of the day, they do what they want, right? But I just find it a bit of a shame for everyone. You will never see these classic wet races anymore, for they're too risk averse. Techier than techie things, that Maximilian Verstappen blazing a trail, going scorched earth at the FIA and the stewards for being too risk averse as far as running a wet race. It would have favoured Maximilian Verstappen. We might have got a Brazil 2024 again. But again, lean into the F1 snowflakery. Why don't you? Formula 1, as if these guys aren't the best 20 drivers in the world on the grid. It gets techier than techie things. To summarise, then Maximilian Verstappen is going nowhere in 2026. Oh, the humanity. And I thought it might be a thing, a real thing, but 100 million as far as the buyout clause proves to be the impediment, the principal one. So too Maximilian Verstappen's desire not to make a move. And it's important, chat. Here's what's important. On the James Allen podcast the other day, they said that it is of gargantuan consequence. Imagine for a second, in hypothetical world, that Max goes to Mercedes in 2026, and then all of this rumour and speculation about them having the best car, the best power unit, all of that fades to black. Imagine it was Gonzo, and Max Verstappen at this juncture has signed a 4 or 5 year contract with Toto and is locked in to yet another car that only underperforms. What's the point then? And the reason why this is so important, chat, is because Maximilian Verstappen, now a 4-time champion, has the opportunity to kick on over the next 4 years and become, I don't know, say an unprecedented 8-time champion. That's true unprecedented levels of greatness, and that's why this decision matters so much. Do we talk about Maximilian Verstappen as a brilliant driver that could have been an 8-time champion, but for some dodgy decisions, just like we do Fernando Alonso or a Niki Lauda or an Alan Prost? Or will Max Verstappen now stick to dismount, nail himself a brilliant decision, and end up in a car that can win races and therefore championship? Just like, I don't know, Reagan Meisters, Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton, because at least statistically there are levels to this F1 game, particularly when we talk about the Mount Rushmore. 7-time champions, Michael and Lewis, sit here, and all the rest, at the very least statistically, Fangio 5, beneath him you've got Prost. Statistically there is 2 tiers. There is Lewis and there is Michael, and then there are the rest, at the very least if you look at paper. Now, Max's decision and how good or bad it is will define and determine whether he sits on tier 1 alongside Sir Lewis and Michael Schumacher, the 7 or more club, or whether he sits beneath them alongside Fangio, Prost, Lauda, et al. That's how important this is. It's F1 barbershop talk, but it is a moment of import. Maximilian Verstappen, ladies and gentlemen, it is your move. So between now and next time, prosecution rests. No further questions.